Andrea, at what point do you want the that taken down?
Good question. I guess it can be up there while I'm talking, and then when Lisa starts talking, you can take it down. Maybe. What do folks think? That makes sense. So during my little initial intro, and then when Lisa gets into the more content stuff, then we can take it down.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to start letting people in just so that they can filter in over the next. Oh wait, what time is it? I'll give it one more minute.
Tom, is it normal that I see the breakout rooms and joining?
Tom, are you doing some breakout room stuff?
The breakout rooms should, well, I had to close them and open them back up because people have to join the meeting and I won't be able to move them into the meeting until everyone joins. So if somebody wants to join, then I want to make sure that we get them in there.
Okay, it's asking me to join right now.
It is?
Yeah.
God dang it. Close them all, forget it. I'll change it.
I'm very grateful for Tom for being in charge of the breakout rooms.
Yes, thank you, Tom.
Yes.
I think I'll just make a note to people, like, I think I'll explain the breakout room situation and just say, you know, we've set up breakout rooms in case people are having a crisis or feeling like they need to speak to someone.
That's good.
That's the only time we'll use the breakout rooms. If you accidentally get an invitation to a breakout room and you're not in crisis, just ignore it, close it, and the session will continue. Or maybe I'll say, like, the main session is taking place within, there's no breakout rooms for today's session. The breakout rooms are only there for people who are experiencing a crisis.
Yeah. Good
I
idea.
feel like we need a little breakout room disclaimer. Although people, you know, may not be listening, but anyway. Here we go.
We have a good turnout.
And Ben, do you want me to say that when I do my housekeeping?
Sure. Could you do that, Lisa? That would be great.
Okay.
There's 100 and, let me see. It's like 180, 190 people registered.
We're at 50 waiting.
There were people from New Brunswick. I bet you they're the ones who signed in at noon. I don't know how or why. Did anyone send it to people in New Brunswick?
I'm just going to admit people now just to let you know.
Okay. Thanks for coming, folks. We'll just wait a few more minutes. There's still people that are coming on in, so we'll just start in a few minutes. We'll start at 5 after. So we're going to get started in about one more minute. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'll be hosting us today. My name is Andrea Poncia, and I'm the coordinator of Suicide Prevention Ottawa. Suicide Prevention Ottawa is a group of organizations working together to make services more effective at preventing suicide across the lifespan. We've been working together as a community to prevent suicide and respond to suicide deaths in Ottawa since 1989. And some of the organizations involved in Suicide Prevention Ottawa, it's a very large network. We're very fortunate to have many organizations collaborating and working together. Some of the organizations that are on the coordinating committee are the Royal Ottawa Hospital, Ottawa Public Health, Youth Services Bureau, Canadian Mental Health Association, Ottawa Police Services, Parents Lifelines of Eastern Ontario, among many others. So I welcome you all. I know many of you are here today. Thank you for coming, and I welcome everyone for supporting us in this event. So the webinar is about the Skills for Safer Living program, and it continues Suicide Prevention Ottawa's One Good Thing campaign. To learn more about that campaign, you can go to our Twitter website, which is @OTT Prevention, and you'll see many really helpful videos about Suicide Prevention Ottawa and about One Good Thing campaign. The campaign helps to shed light on the importance of focusing on our strengths when supporting people who are struggling with suicide. Before starting today's webinar, we wanted to acknowledge that Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. We honor the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Next, I want to welcome the MC for today's event, Lisa Cowley. She's the Manager of Prevention and Promotion Initiatives at the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm really pleased to be here to MC today's really important event. The Mental Health Commission of Canada was keen to join in hosting today's event, both as a collaborator and as an organization that invests in delivering suicide prevention and life promotion programs across Canada. The Mental Health Commission of Canada enables Canadian and change makers with tools and best practices based in evidence, collaboration, and lived experience. We believe in a bright future where mental health is health and everyone has equitable access to quality mental health supports and services. I'm going to start with some housekeeping. While we are going to invite you to ask questions in the chat function throughout the event, we'll only be addressing the questions at the end of the session. Today's session is about hope and resilience, and we will explore the Skills for Safer Living program that supports people who struggle with suicidal thoughts and actions to live normal and healthy lives. While we talk about how Skills for Safer Living interventions support people through these difficult circumstances, we'll also be touching on people's living and lived experience with suicide. Talking about mental health can sometimes bring emotions to the surface. This is normal. If you need to take a break today, please take a break from the session. Feel free to do so. During the session, you can reach out to one of our two support professionals who are on today's webinar. Today with us, we have Tracy Foster and Renee Binet. These two professionals can be reached directly through our chat for support at any time. And this is at the point where you would be provided with a private breakout room. That's the only time today during our session that breakout rooms will be used. We also have our colleagues at the Distress Center and the 24/7 crisis line and crisis chat that are available to support you in your time of need. So please see the numbers below in the comment section and in the chat. They will be posted throughout the session a number of times for your convenience. The focus of today's session will be the Skills for Safer Living program, and it's a program that's been running for the last 20 years throughout Ontario. We will hear from one of the co-creators of the program, Dr. Yvonne Bergmans. Yvonne will talk about the genesis of the program and how it's met a gap in service over many, many years. Dr. Yvonne Bergmans is a suicide interventionist at St. Michael's Hospital, the University of Toronto. We will also hear from Dr. Tim Guimont, who will help position the work clinically and answer our questions about how this works from his perspective as a psychiatrist. Dr. Guimont works with people who experience suicidal thoughts and actions at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. Then last but certainly not least, we will hear from Yolande Roberge about her personal lived experiences with suicide, but also about her experience as a peer facilitator and community educator for the Skills for Safer Living program. I would like to thank our three presenters for taking the time to plan and present today during our webinar for Skills for Safer Living, and I'm going to turn it back to you, Andrea.
Great, welcome, thank you. And I'm just going to hand it right over to Yolande, who's going to start us off today, and we'll just get started. Actually, you know what, though, before we start, I apologize, I skipped a beat there. So Suicide Prevention Ottawa is presenting this event today with the hopes that some of our organizations here in Ottawa, or even some champions, might be interested in implementing the Skills for Safer Living program in Ottawa. So it's not currently offered in Ottawa. It's offered in Toronto, in Waterloo, in Simcoe County, and among many other cities in Ontario and in Canada, but not in Ottawa yet. So the tools we'll learn about today would be beneficial for organizations and individuals in Ottawa, and we hope that we can find a group of people who'd like to work to bring in this program here. So I wanted to plant that seed at the beginning of the session and invite people who may be interested to reach out to me at the end of the session to discuss what that might look like. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and I think that you already all have my contact information as well. So now I'd like to pass it on to Yvonne. Yvonne, welcome.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Like, this is an incredible turnout. It's really quite daunting in many ways, but I'll breathe through it and we'll just do the best I can at this point. Let's see. So I think one of the things I'd like to begin with is to identify that we don't look at suicide from the perspective of diagnoses. It's pretty much known that suicide is a diagnostic agnostic. It crosses all boundaries. It can also be an event that occurs either in terms of thoughts or behaviors for people who have no diagnoses. And it crosses all sectors of society. The Skills for Safer Living intervention is about engaging with the possibility, not the hope, the possibility of choosing to live and to live life more safely, regardless of the struggles that you may be experiencing. Recognizing that not everyone who has been identified with a mental illness attempts suicide, nor do all people who die by suicide or attempt suicide have a diagnosis. We never deny the fact that a person may attempt to end their life by suicide in the future, regardless of having worked with us and us working with them collaboratively to try to live life as safely as possible. We acknowledge that thoughts of suicide might be persistent for some people and that they may ebb and flow for others. For some, suicide thoughts have ended completely, and we can't predict what the intervention is going to render for any given individual. So it's not about stopping all thoughts of suicide. We don't have that level of control, and we can't predict who will in fact die by suicide. What we can do is walk with a person in understanding what suicide means for them, what it would alleviate for them, and how do you live with some of those thoughts that come either persistently or intermittently, and how can you turn the volume down? We can look at the even if scenario. So even if thoughts of suicide arise or persist, how can you consider engaging with the possibility of choosing not to die right now? Or choosing to live right now? Those are two very different elements. Because for some people, choosing not to die right now is a minute by minute decision, hour by hour, day by day. And we have to support them through those minutes and days. We provide clients with the tools to help them choose safer choices. And people who work with me know that I focus very heavily on the because some people don't know what safe is. Some people have had such traumatic experiences in their lives, they've never experienced safe. So how can you understand safer is what we invite them to look at. We look at thoughts of suicide as a warning sign to the intense subjective emotional pain that a person is experiencing. Schneidman called that psychache. And it's the behavior of hurting oneself that is the communication. It's the ultimate communication to the degree of distress that a person is experiencing. We began in February 1999 at St. Mike's as the psychosocial psychoeducational intervention for people with recurrent suicide attempts. Huge name. I think medicine really likes acronyms, so it was PISA. And then we ended up moving to offering the intervention in the community and changed the name to Skills for Safer Living, because that's what it's about. It's how can you live life more safely. The intervention evolved through many people from different walks of life, and they've all contributed their experience, their backgrounds, their education, and their perspectives in creating the program. It's an evolving program. We talk about having a guide or a handbook, not a manual, because it's going to depend on what we're working with in terms of time, in terms of the people involved, in terms of the culture of the community. It's got to make sense for the individuals. So it's both a community and a hospital-based program, where it's been offered in both. We've expanded over the years where it began with people exclusively with recurrent suicide attempts to keep them out of the hospital as much as possible. We've now gone to people 18 years and above, groups for people with ideation only, people with single and recurrent suicide attempts, post-secondary groups, high school group 16 to 18 years. And then we've had a youth parent guardian 14 to 16-year-old group as well. And what we're looking at doing in terms of the goal and the purpose, and it's to provide educative and emotional support to group members who are experiencing emotional crises that contribute to thoughts of suicide. We're looking at engaging with the possibility of choosing to live and to live life more safely. We're not looking at cure. We're looking at decreasing the duration, intensity, and frequency of crisis episodes. And we're offering an opportunity to develop skills to live life more safely through crisis de-escalation, emotional literacy, problem solving, and communication strategies. And we're looking at helping people develop a language to communicate their distress in a way that's non-behavioral and could be perceived as unsafe or threatening or manipulative to other people. It's a way of saying, this is what I feel, this is what I need, can you help? And we use a group format because when people said, you're getting a bunch of people who tried to kill themselves in the same room, what are you thinking? And you know what? The shared experience is critical in generating a sense of belonging, universality, sharing resources, skills, and group cohesion. It's all of the factors that Yalom speaks about in terms of groups. People in the group experience a wide array of challenges. If you've got a pulse, I'll pretty much take you, right? Because people have been excluded from so many groups and therapies and interventions. So we see people with challenges that include addictions, recovery issues, trauma, mental health symptoms, socioeconomic struggles, oppression, discrimination, marginalization. The inclusion criteria is the identification, their identification, not mine, not somebody else's, of an attempt or thoughts of suicide. And we only talk about diagnosis if it's relevant in the way that empowers and educates participants. And it's really quite surprising to us how many people will say they don't know what their diagnosis is, or they've got so many they can't figure out what's what. When we're looking at who facilitates the group, we're looking at a regulated healthcare professional with a person with lived experience of suicide-related thoughts and behaviors. And they have to be able to, the person has to be able to talk about their experience of having suicide-related thoughts and behaviors. It's an interprofessional model with differing points of view. We've had psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists, recreation therapists, psychiatry residents, med students, social work students. And these are welcome because we want to implicitly model the fact that there isn't necessarily one opinion and it's always right. There can be different ways of looking at things. And I like getting the learners when they're young. The earlier I can get these professional babies, the sooner I want them in the room. Because people talk about how powerful the experience is to be in a room with folks and hear them as articulate, smart, creative, funny individuals, when in all likelihood, they've only seen them in crisis at their worst moment. We have a minimum of 2 facilitators per group, And facilitators do a 5-day training, which is 2 days of theory and 3 days of what some of our participants have called group therapy boot camp, where it's experiential for 3 days. Group facilitators ensure that the group is a safe place. And they're looking at teaching the concepts, the strategies, and skills in a way that will maximize the learning opportunities for group members. So it's being very creative in how you deliver the material, whether that be through metaphor, analogy, diagrams, stories. There's a lot of people who have had the experience of learning challenges and finding out what those are. So what way do they learn best? Do they need somebody to read stuff for them? Does it work better pictorially? And being attuned to the needs and the processes and the stages of groups so that they can, in fact, respond appropriately. We don't want to go too deep, too fast. We want to be able to have a base from which we can return to if things start getting a little heated or intense. Being emotionally present. Facilitators are requested to be human, to be genuine. You can't hide behind your cloak of professionalism. You're offering support and encouragement by acknowledging the challenges, and you're celebrating the successes. And we always keep a watchful eye on how the content and the processes are impacting individuals, and inviting them to process and talk about what they're finding challenging in a given moment. And we always silently hold hope for the possibility that a person can bring about change in their own lives. We can't make anyone anything. Otherwise, the magic wand would have gone abracadabra and I wouldn't know any of their names. Because, you know, first time meeting, you'd go abracadabra and I've made you better. Our job is as a co-journeyer. We're walking with people in the good times and bad. The underpinning arises out of an emotion-focused narrative perspective. And as I mentioned, the handbook is influenced by concepts, strategies, and skills that are born from facilitators and participant experiences, their training, their exposure to a wide array of therapeutic modalities. So not only are we diagnostically agnostic, we also beg, borrow, and utilize a whole lot of different strategies from different kinds of therapeutic modalities. And the people who have, in fact, contributed have differing skill sets and backgrounds, and they present what they found really helpful or useful or a way of presenting inside of a session. We assume that group members are capable people and every person in the room has strengths and passions. We assume that people want to live differently. We also believe that group members are responsible for making choices to help themselves. It's not about a good choice or a bad choice. It's about, was this the safest choice in the moment? Group members are able to learn new and more adaptive coping strategies, and it is critical that everyone in the room is both a learner and a teacher to the process of living life more safely. Just because you have a certain set of letters behind your name doesn't give you more privilege in terms of the learner-teacher piece. What we look at as being important is that everybody has to have a community support person whom they see on a regular basis in between sessions. Now, that could be a really, really strong sponsor if they're in AA. It could be a spiritual director or a pastor or clergy person. It could be a social worker. It could be a therapist. It's somebody who's not a friend and not in their family. We start with 12 people in a group, recognizing that as per usual with a lot of groups, it's 20 to 30% attrition, which is not unusual. Our numbers are generally pretty good, around 20 to 25. If a person uses substances, can they remain sober prior to and during the group to participate? With a little bit of a caveat in that there are some people who can function after having had their little shot in their coffee first thing in the morning. It's, can you be a contributing member and can you take in the information? We need to recognize that there are learning issues for people. People with acquired brain injuries, strokes, learning disabilities, literacy issues, they are capable of participating in the group. And we discuss those accommodations that they might need with them when we first meet with them. Means and methods are not discussed in the sessions. This is not a how-to group. They've already figured that out. Thank you very much. We don't need to teach them more. We have a different modalities. We've got a 3-week group right now that's going on in Ireland. It's part of a research study, and it's expressly for coming out with a safety plan. That 3-week group looks at the basic concepts of the skills for safer living intervention: early warning signs, crisis survival strategies, safe, unsafe, scale of intensity, and coming out with a safety plan. Who to go to when you need help and who the heck to stay away from, even if you'd really like your mother to be the best supportive person. If she hasn't been able to support you in 42 years, she's not getting it. We've got to find somebody else. Don't call her. We've got a 4-week group that has just been started since COVID because wait lists were getting really, really ridiculous. And this is your introduction to the 20-week group, which is a 20-week group. We have found that for people with ideation only, those groups tend to go more quickly. They process and integrate more quickly, and the facilitators have found that they can do it in 10 weeks. We do 1 session per week. It's 90 minutes. And although it's modular in nature, facilitators need to know the content in order to raise concepts as it's applicable in a given session. And we always do a housekeeping piece, we do an icebreaker, and that's not related to suicide. It's connecting people based on their human interests. Favorite color, favorite food, favorite band. If you could be, you know, any character from a movie, who would you be? You know, it's just a quick 1-minute check-in. There's something called the triangle, and you'll see one in a few minutes. Every session starts with it. Then we do a teaching of concepts and skills, and then we do a checkout. When we talk about working from the emotion-focused narrative perspective, given that every theory about suicide and why people die by suicide or experience suicide-related thoughts and behaviors is about deep and intense pain. And what we work on is the emotional literacy. If you are experiencing something physiologically and you haven't got a name for it, it can often result in an automatic, impulsive, and unhelpful behavior. So what we're doing is we're teaching people a language. Can you name the feeling? Can you breathe through it? What are you saying about this feeling? Let's take out good, bad, right, wrong. Take the judgment out of it to create options for yourself, to create a safer behavior and engage in a safer behavior. So this is one that is completed, and a person will talk about a situation which a participant will identify, you know, this is what happened. And we ask about it in terms of skills used, challenges, or aha moments or insights. And so they talk about the situation and then the feelings related to it. What we find is in the first few weeks, we get very little, but it's an interactive process where somebody can say, oh yeah, I've been through that kind of a situation, or I've had that constellation of feelings, or if I were in that situation, I'd feel A, B, or C. What are you saying about those feelings? Where are they happening in your body? This is bad. I can't do this. It's never going to work out. This is hard work. I'm not good enough. So what are your moments of control? And what are your choices? And how can you create the widest array of choices so that you can then engage in a safer behavior? Not right, not wrong, not good or bad, safer. So when we're looking at safety in the first module, we're looking at de-escalation strategies, personal rights and responsibilities, understanding what safe means for a person, networks, early warning signs, a scale of intensity, and a safety plan. In the second module, we're looking at emotional literacy. What is the role of feelings? Naming feelings. What are the unwritten rules, all those shoulds we live through, those expectations? Is that yours or mine? Whose voice is it? How old were you when you got that unwritten rule and that should? How's it getting in the way of 2022? Is it relevant? Diagnostic literacy, if people are wanting to learn about it, and how anger gets used as a protective behavior. We look at problem solving, identifying needs, what's the role of negative self-talk, cognitive distortions, problem-solving strategy, and how do you set goals for yourself. And then where we take the final module is around goals of relationships, which is modified from Linehan's work, communication strategies, anger styles, and boundaries. Sometimes we get through everything, and sometimes we don't. You work with what the group needs. We don't limit who can refer people, and each person must have a thorough assessment prior to coming in, and that's usually about an hour and a half. And it covers a lot of the history of being in groups, what are the family social networks, what are their living arrangements, their engagement with work or education, their previous and current suicidality, and are they able to distinguish the function of different non-suicidal self-injury from attempts, and what are the goals and functions of each? What are the diagnoses they've been ascribed, and does it resonate for them? Current and previous interventions or treatments that they've been in, have they been helpful, and are they able and ready to go into group? It's mandatory that there be clinical supervision. You can't do this work alone. And so it's weekly, and when we're working with facilitators, sometimes facilitators really struggle with something that's happened in group, or something that we've talked about in group. And that's where we offer one-to-one for the facilitator for their debriefing. When we do supervision, peer supervision, it's anybody who's running a group in the agency at that time. So we can have up to 15 people, and that's the peer as well as the professionals. We are a team. I don't really care what your designation is. We are all facilitators in the group. And we focus on the group functioning, the content challenges, facilitator concerns regarding participant safety, engagement, and we celebrate where we can. Where are the transferences, countertransferences, and projective identification issues? And what are the team dynamics? Because we got to pay attention to ourselves as well if this is going to work. And maintaining fidelity to the core concepts and skills and underpinnings of the intervention. Our peers historically were always a graduate of the program who would come back as a peer facilitator. Our team in Wellington Waterloo was the first community organization to deliver the intervention. And they have folks in their self-help group who are people with lived experience who had not done the group. And so they don't have graduates of the program who are peer facilitators. So we have a number of different kinds of models. If we're going to actually, for those people who like numbers, and Tim will tell you, numbers and I have a very, very bad relationship with one another. But the differences we see, alexithymia is huge. It's something that I picked up really, really early. And these people cannot describe or identify feelings. So when we say, what are you feeling? How are you feeling? You may or may not get something that's accurate. They don't have a language. If you don't have a language for emotion, how do you understand your own story?
So that fancy word alexithymia just means that, like an ability to name, describe, and problem solve around your emotions. And those are kind of the three, you'll see the externally oriented thinking, describing feelings, identifying feelings are the subscales or the subparts of this thing called alexithymia.
Yeah, and those are the things that we saw with significant changes. Satisfaction with life improved, confidence in their own ability to problem solve, depression and hopelessness. We saw changes as well. So I think I'm going to leave it to the psychiatrist
to talk a little bit about what it's been like as a psychiatrist to come and join. So at St. Mike's, there's been this history of various psychiatrists over time taking the opportunity to work with Yvonne and to collaborate together to learn more and to be better prepared for both delivering skills for safer living, but also considering how to incorporate the things that we learned in skills for safer living into the other type of work that we do. And so this is kind of as critical because there really is minimal training often within psychiatry training programs on issues of suicide. And when we are trained on them, it's often seen as a symptom of various mental health disorders and not seen as Yvonne has described it as like really something separate that you might want to consider that might be also separate from and apart from a mental health diagnosis specifically. And so unfortunately, what happens is people then recognize it as a concerning symptom and then people get forced or get into this mindset of thinking as a psychiatrist, well, I really need to assess whether or not the person needs to be treated involuntarily. Are they safe right now? Do I need to bring them to hospital? Do I need to form them? Do I need to certify them? These are sorts of questions that become probably the most frightening potentially parts of learning as a psychiatrist, your responsibilities. And it can also mean that people reduce their assessment down to this idea of, well, have I figured out if the person has an intent? Do they have a plan? Do they have the means? And this all tends to prioritize making a guess, I would say, at acuity. How serious is this and how likely is this to be a problem in the next short while? But that focus can detract from actually focusing broadly on understanding what is this expressing and what's the best way to intervene. It also can lead psychiatrists to end up in these power struggles of whether I'm going to force someone to hospital or not, over top of and instead of actually building on a collaboration with someone to try to help in the moment when they have come to your office, they've come to an emerge, they're in front of a psychiatrist looking for care. So the other problem I think that happens sometimes in psychiatry training is that we are frequently exposed to understanding recurrent suicide as it relates to borderline personality disorder or a mood disorder. Because we think diagnostically, we might get trapped into thinking these are the two things we need to understand to be of use. And so we get lots of training potentially on those two things with a little less training on it suicide more broadly. I mean, the exception to this is that safety planning has been brought up as a topic that we teach residents and we are taught as psychiatrists, but sometimes that can be very fast, as I say, perfunctory. It's sort of like, oh, you're just going through the motions here and it's not nuanced and less is the focus on the collaboration that happens and that is needed to be of use. And then I would argue that this training of psychiatrists then influences the other people other MDs that you might come across, family practice medicine practitioners or emergency room colleagues who are kind of looking to the psychiatrist for their guidance and then start following our lead. And if we're not collaborative, it kind of means that maybe they're not collaborative either. You will, of course, be able to find fantastic family physicians who break the mold, fantastic emergency physicians who break the mold, but they are probably exposed to a lot of psychiatrists that are in a singular way of thinking. And so, you know, if you kind of go back to this idea of BPD and mood disorders as this kind of frame that we're asked to think about, then we think about these treatments for these things in medical settings in a particular way. We got very reliant on the cognitive behavioral treatments. That's become central in a lot of training of psychiatry residents, and thus in the way they formulate the term we use to say how they're putting together, why is this problem happening at this point for this person? And while CBT has been very helpful for certain things, it may not be the only or the most useful way to think about people having suicidality. And so it can get us trapped. It's also true that it can be useful when people have awareness of their cognitions, awareness of their emotions, and a willingness to engage in a structured therapy, that people will follow this. However, and CBTs are structured, then they can work well if you have that awareness. They can work well if you really know what your emotions are. There are a set of people where that's actually the beginning struggle. And so I have found that Skills for Safer Living is very useful for building a groundwork for people who that may not be the case. And so CBT really wouldn't appeal to them. Dialectical behavioral therapy, which we hear lots about, is very well studied and rolled out, but really was only ever designed as a stage 1 treatment of a therapeutic intervention. The later stages of DBT are still kind of meant to be developed. And I think that leads us to thinking sometimes that DBT is going to solve everything instead of recognizing that might be a beginning step. And like with all therapies, it works for some people and not for others. And so we need some other options. And so I would argue that these seem to be, in Toronto, they're the very common things. I don't know so much about in Ottawa, if you have other things available like schema therapy, mentalization therapy for BPD, if you have other kind of more broad interventions for suicide that might fall out of this. This tends to be a lot of how people in Toronto are trained, and that sometimes I think gets people when they're not ready or not interested in these approaches, they can fall through the cracks. So what makes Skills for Safer Living, I think, really stand out for me is that it really is transdiagnostic. It goes across, and as Yvonne put it bluntly, if you have a pulse, you're welcome to join our group. And this means that we hear from a very diverse set of individuals in the group. And then I would argue that a lot of the focus is on some of the developmental tasks that are needed to do well in other kind of psychotherapies or psychosocial interventions. It is helpful to really have a good language around your emotions to do well in any kind of therapy or a group setting. It is very helpful to be able to recognize your needs, desires, and your rights, and to start believing that you have rights. And that's kind of a fundamental piece that I think that Skills for Safer Living really addresses. And then being able to process traumatic aspects of life and the care you received to date means talking a little bit frankly about what your experiences have been to date. And as a psychiatrist sitting in this room, I've frequently heard of the just horror stories and the terrible ways that people have been treated in stigmatizing ways in our emergency rooms, in our hospitals, in other care situations, and needing to remain humble and have open ears and an open heart to listening to how that's affected people and what we could be doing differently. One thing that I think, when we ask people to come into behavioral treatments, or we ask people to come to therapy, we're often asking them to do a lot, which implies being hopeful and willing in a kind of way that sometimes isn't quite there if you have recurrent suicidality. And sometimes actually the thing that's very nice is to be able to have people come to the room who just aren't so sure they want to make this choice. They really are struggling between, do I have they're living to die, to I'm choosing not to die right now, and can I make that choice? And so just welcoming hopelessness and not trying to create hope when it's too far of a step is an important part of, I think, skills, which makes that we offer things as invitations and we remind people of this choice, and that, you know, there's no homework assigned, there's an invitation to try some things, and you might decide to pick up the invitation and try it, you might decide not to. I believe in that way it's very pragmatic. We really are looking at self-efficacy, and this is very much implicitly communicated. This is sometimes in opposition to how psychiatrists are taught to, like, you figure out what the prescription is and I just tell you what to do and then you go do it and that's how you're going to make you better, which is kind of this whole medical model, which is not really an approach that I think is particularly useful here. And so this focus on control and choice and autonomy is super critical. And the last thing I would say that's real, that I have found particularly inviting for me, I trained in hypnosis, so I find this to resonate for me, is that metaphor is a much easier way to communicate complex ideas. And Skills for Safer Living is filled with metaphors that we end up learning and sharing that help normalize a lot of the experiences that people have with psychache. And they include some pretty short earworms that Yvonne can roll off her tongue quite regularly that stick with people, and they will frequently come back and have certain messages about this, which I believe I talk about on the next slide. But basically those things are decreased resistance. So I have many clients say, fuck you, I heard your voice in my head now, Yvonne. So I'm in this situation and I'm just like, and yet there's those sort of earworms. It's like a feeling's a feeling's, a feeling is a feeling is a feeling. A feeling can't kill you. A thought can't kill you, but what you do with either one could. So there are a number of little earworms that we just say over and over again that are communicating kind of metaphoric message or a direct message that are useful. And I can say that I honestly have many a moment when I'm going through my day and someone says something to me and I have a little fuck you or thank you and fuck you, Yvonne. I have something I can say to this now because I have this little earworm that sounds really good to say right now. And the person's probably not always going to like me saying it, but it brings about a really interesting conversation and opens an avenue for thinking about things a little bit differently and getting curious. So I do a lot of DBT. I run a DBT group, I supervise DBT groups, and now in the midst of doing that, I reference a lot of Skills for Safer Living material that I find often is more fundamental and helps people get to where some of the DBT stuff could be useful. There are places in DBT where I realize, well, that doesn't work nearly as well as what we did in Skills, so I'm just going to use that instead. I also find that for myself and the residents I've worked with, we often find that skills material is really helpful in the emergency department. And so now I know Yvonne is also working on some projects where in the emerge, they're attempting to use skills for kind of one single sessions. But I also know that for many of the residents who have been exposed to this, many of the psychiatrists who are exposed to this, we do interventions in the emerge. Instead of just seeing it as an opportunity to assess, we're thinking, how do we help? And the Skills for Safer Living material can be very useful in those moments. I also would say that one of the profound things I've gotten from working with Yvonne and working in Skills for Safer Living is a real appreciation for alexithymia, to be really listening to the clues that someone is struggling to name the emotion they're feeling. And there may have been all sorts of unwritten rules in their family that it was, you know, not okay to feel, express, or acknowledge an emotion. And those things have lots of social pressures. Guys are not supposed to be scared. Guys are not supposed to be sad. Women are not supposed to be angry. There's all sorts of unwritten rules that we get enculturated into that I think is very useful. And a follow-up part of that question for me is, what age is this person? Which kind of relates to how easily, because maybe you can, in a moment of calm, describe your emotions really well, and maybe in a moment of not so calm is a whole lot more difficult. And I'm going to hand this over to Lori.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about the experience of being someone who has ongoing suicidal thoughts. I have most of my life. I can remember having some thoughts as young as 9 or 10 years old about wanting to go to bed and not wake up. So it's something that I live with. And when as growing up and throughout my life, I felt a lot of guilt and shame because suicide, I felt I couldn't talk to anybody about this. And if I did mention something going down that line, I was usually shut down, or no, I don't want to hear this, or it's not really happening. There was no validation there. So when I joined the group as a participant, it was the first time ever that I felt safe to talk about suicide. And that was very, very powerful. I realized that I wasn't alone and that there was nothing wrong with me. Belief that I've had, that I had had all of my life. I would listen to people talking and I would find myself nodding. And when I would share, other people were nodding in understanding and having been there. And I think that's the privilege of being a peer support worker and doing skills for safer living, is that over and over, I get that validation and I can give that same validation to other people. It really opened the possibility that I was capable of living and having suicidal thoughts at the same time. I have quite high anxiety, so when my anxiety goes up, I typically have more thoughts that come. And I just, I would panic. Here we go again. Am I safe? I don't think so. Like, it just was winding me up even more. And now I don't give suicidal thoughts that much power. I've learned to, if something comes in my head, it's just my normal. I've been able to normalize it for myself. And when I explain it to others, they get it. Like, it doesn't have to be something that, and you realize that there are so many other people that have these thoughts, at least sometime, at one point in their lives, that it just becomes, if you have it over and over again, it's where my mind goes. It's my normal. It's the best way I can explain it. It's also the first time that I really became aware that I had choices. I always thought that other people knew better what was right for me. And even when I wanted to take the course, take the group, my own psychiatrist, who is fabulous, was against it. She said, "You're not well enough. It's going to be too triggering." And so it's not a good idea. And I persisted. I really wanted to try this. And of course, every time I talked to her about suicide, I would either end up in Emerge or in the hospital. And that wasn't working for me. Sometimes it helped and sometimes it made things worse. So I stopped talking to her about my suicidal thoughts pretty much altogether. So when I realized in the group that I had choices, I didn't have to listen to what other people said I should do, or what I shouldn't do. And so I think as a peer support provider, that self-determination and self-responsibility was huge. Every group we talk about, what are your choices? Thoughts, self-defeating thoughts, a lot of the shoulds, statements that I was telling myself, I'm not good enough, all those self-defeating thoughts were challenged. and my strengths were pointed out, which a lot of the time when you ask people, what are your strengths? They're kind of dumbfounded and say, well, I'm not really good at anything. I learned to build better supports to match where my suicidal thoughts were. So what intensity they are. Yvonne gave the example of my mom. My mom is a great support. But if I talk to her when the intensity of the thoughts are really high, I just end up triggering her more, which triggers me more, and it just doesn't end in a very good in a good way. And I learned how to communicate openly and honestly with my clinical supports, including this psychiatrist. And I didn't give her the warning that I would be changing my vocabulary and the amount that I was going to disclose about this suicidal thoughts. And the first time I told her, I ended up in hospital. And so that was a huge learning opportunity for me to realize I had to give her the heads up that I was going to be changing how I was going to be talking and using a language that actually ends up being easier for her to understand when I talk about intensity of the thoughts and the frequency of the thoughts and the duration of the thoughts. So that was very, very helpful. And as Yvonne pointed out, everyone around the table is a learner. Everybody at every course, every group that I've facilitated, I've learned so much from other people. So that's one of the best benefits. The first thing as a peer facilitator, now I'm switching gears, now I'm as a facilitator, is the first thing in my mind is I need to provide a safe environment where people can talk about suicide. And I find that because I'm so comfortable talking about my own experience, people start sharing their own experiences. And the fact that everyone starts sharing, you're feeling less and less alone. You're feeling like this is something that happens to a lot of people, and there's nothing to be ashamed about it. And it's a great place to share your experience. That being said, everyone's experience is different. But it really opens up the door for people who have never talked about their suicidal thoughts, or not honestly, for them to be able to do so. Next slide. And peer facilitators. So I use my own experience to share how I see the concepts of and the skills that we talk about in Skills for Safer Living. So I put my own spin on it because it's what makes sense for me. It won't make sense for everyone. So when somebody just says, no, that's useless, that doesn't make sense, it's actually an opportunity, a great opportunity to open up the door for learning and saying, okay, I'm curious, tell me how it would make sense for you, or why it doesn't make sense for you. And that would, everyone around the table again is privy to learning the other people's opinions and learn from other people's experiences, because everyone is different. Everyone is the expert on themselves only. So what works for me may work for somebody else and may not. But if I can learn another tool, another thing that somebody's talked about that works for them, and I'm in not so great situation, I'll be able to, I'll try anything. So next slide. And the other thing that's, I think is really important to have people with lived experience as part of the facilitation team is that I really have been there. I can understand the language. I can understand the emotions and the not having the words to describe. And for showing people that it is possible, that this group has changed my life in a very dramatic way, and that it is possible for them. If I can do it, other people can do it too. And sometimes I can have suicidal thoughts and thinking, and I check in on myself and say, do I really want this? And I can say, well, I might want it in a way, but I want to live too. And if I can have those two things at the same time, and it's just like having, somebody with diabetes, they live with it. They don't, it's not something that they have to fight. So I certainly keep it in check, but at the same time, I expect it. It's just part of my normal. So, and as Yvonne said, it's the group really focuses on staying as safe as possible in a difficult moment. There is absolutely no judgment on what type of coping strategy you use. So if some things worked in the past and you've used substances, you've self-harmed in any way, and that works, that relieves that pressure, and you go to that because you've tried everything else and nothing else is working, and you just, and in group, we talk about it. We don't talk about the means or the methods, but we talk about the being open about what strategy, or having a not so healthy strategy for coping that time. And then we go where our goal is to minimize the harm. So in the future, so we can brainstorm, if that happens again, how can you make the situation safer? And you might be coping in the same way, but how can you do it in a safer way? And without judgment. Often people feel discouraged, and they failed if they resorted to their old coping strategy. But hey, if it kept you alive in a difficult moment, good for you. You did what you had to. And it encourages participants and facilitators to share their own coping strategies so that everyone, again, can learn from each other. And finally, it encourages, as I spoke to, self-determination and self-responsibility. It really gives people that power that I am capable of making decisions in regards to my own choice and my own needs. And I need to respect my personal choices. And sometimes I may, everyone makes mistakes. It's part of life. It makes me human. And through the group, we really meet people where they're at. So, and that can vary from one week to the other. So we have participants that after a number of weeks exchange phone numbers because they relate to each other really well. And sometimes they can, become supports for each other. So that's really, really helpful. And the group really helps to advocate for our personal rights and freedom of choice.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Yolene. Thank you for your presentation. It was real, it was informative. We're often too afraid to address the issue of suicide, and we're too afraid to talk about it openly, and from the fear that it could make things worse. But your presentations truly reassured us that indeed it is okay to discuss, and that hope and resilience and community are possible for people struggling with suicide. Yolene, I'd like to especially thank you for sharing your wisdom with the group. Hearing you speak, I'm truly struck by the value of having a group setting where peers can learn from one another and openly share and learn from people like yourself, experts that are going through and have gone through this. So I'm personally leaving today feeling very inspired and moved by your message. I'd like to turn it back over to Andrea, who is going to open up the floor for questions from our participants.
Thank you. I want to echo Lisa and everyone in the chat to say thank you all so much. It's so insightful, and I'm really grateful, Yolene, and to all of you for your presentation. It's such an honor to get to work with you all. So I would invite people to ask questions in the chat, and we've got some folks who will be able to facilitate the questions and to get us going with those questions. One question that I had to start was, for you, Yvonne, what are some of those earworms that I was curious when I heard Tim talk about it, and they're earworms that make people curse. I want to hear what the earworms are for myself. What are some of them that you use?
Well, I see Yolene's face just light up. Maybe she can talk about some of the ones where she swore at me. A feeling is a feeling is a feeling. It just is. It's not good. It's not bad. Welcome to human. Yeah. Nimmy.
Oh.
Nimmy.
What's
Nummy,
NIMI?
NMI, not my issue. So that's when we're learning about boundaries, and when you take on other nimmy. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. A feeling can't kill you, a thought can't kill you. What you choose to do with either could.
I see. We have another question also, and please, folks, put your questions in the chat, and we'll put those through. Yeah, those are all really helpful. I agree, Ben. Those are good ones, and I've already got one in my. I've already got the feeling is a feeling is a feeling. I've got it. It's in my head now, and I'll think of you too, Yvonne, every time I think of it.
Yeah, well, I yell at articles when they talk about positive and negative feelings, good feelings, bad feelings. I look at articles as I'm reading them, going, "There's no such thing."
Right. Yeah, that whenever we add all that judgment to a feeling is when it becomes really even more powerful, I guess. That's the idea.
Well, our folks are so incredibly vulnerable to begin with. If they've had a suicide attempt, chances are they have been stigmatized and shamed by so many people. It might have been in their emergency contact. It might have been by family or culture or religion. And, you want to humanize their experience as being not their fault. And, welcome to human. You're not a freak of nature. Hello. Welcome to human. You're an individual and you're unique, and nobody can judge you for your subjective experience. I can't tell you what's safe or not safe. So a lot of our folks are very, very fearful, live in a great deal of guilt and shame, and are subsequently very, very isolated, because they can't talk to other people or they can't share other people. with with other people what they're experiencing for fear of complete abandonment and rejection.
Really adds to the already the very scary thoughts that they're having.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, we play with our little sayings, earworms.
And I can see how this program is so essential also because this is a group that has an increased vulnerability to suicide. Am I correct, Yvonne? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, if a person has had a suicide attempt, then they're far more likely to have another attempt or attempt again. Yeah, and I think part of the challenge for all of us as care providers is we'd love to be able to predict who's going to die by suicide, but we can't. All we can do is, as Yolande, said, I can live with thoughts of suicide and live my life. It's not the buts, it's the ands. It's not the shoulds, it's the chooses. Those are other little earworms.
And some of the questions that we're getting are around perhaps the variability in implementing the program. So is it any different? Does the program get implemented differently with youth versus adults, or with people who have intent to harm or experiences of self-harm? Like, are there differences in the implementation?
Same content. Yeah, that's where I very much rely on the facilitator expertise with respect to their particular population expertise, right? So it's the same content in the handbook for the young people. However, it might be delivered pictorially, or we'll have a little book for them that has, like we have one of the early pieces is a mountain climber, and we give them a little workbook where they get to draw their own mountain climber. Where are they on the mountain, and how many times have they slipped and fallen, and being able to look back on that 20 weeks later and go, hey, I'm further up my mountain even though I had a few falls, right? So it's, people will often judge for, well, you're in this treatment, what are you doing, hurting yourself again? Or what are you doing, landing in hospital again? And, in the addictions world, they call it relapse, and we call it recycling. It's like you've gone back to use something. Now, would you learn, and how would you like to do something differently, given what you know now about your own early warning signs, or your own, you reached out to somebody that you realized that was not the best choice for that day, kind of thing. So we don't talk about it in terms of failure. It's what's the learning here, and it's to be expected.
I would argue there's a structure to the group too that makes it very flexible. The triangle is, this way of exploring about, and there's an introductory question. Does anybody today have an aha moment, a concern, a crisis, a question that they would like to focus on, right? So we kind of start with a number of possibilities of what we might talk about, and a volunteer kind of puts their name forward to do the triangle with their content. Now, that doesn't mean it's only theirs, though. Like, it becomes, you start like getting other people piping in about, oh, I've had a similar experience. Well, what was it like for you? And what were the feelings you had? And what were the thoughts you had? And we're often doing things with different colors, so we can kind of see, well, that was from one person, this was from somebody else. And it promotes this idea of self-reflection, right? As the person, if this is my triangle and I'm looking at the situation I've described and what I was feeling, and someone says what they would feel, I might think to myself, oh yeah, I had that feeling too, but I didn't notice it at the time. Or yeah, oh, I was thinking those thoughts, or I didn't think about that choice that I could have done. I would never have allowed myself to do that, but someone says that's exactly what they would have done. And so just like starts building this, like, what were my choices? And in this distinction between where you have a choice and where you have what we talk about as a moment of control, like a moment when you recognize you could make a decision, which requires you to know what the choices are, right? Like, a moment of control isn't so useful if the only choice you can think of is that I'm wearing, moccasins today and they've got holes in them. Like that's all I got, so that's what I'm wearing. But if I knew that I had many other options, I might choose differently, or I might choose similarly. But I would, in that moment of recognizing I can make a choice here, is also what we're hoping getting people to recognize. And I think that that triangle exercise, which takes the first half of each group, refocuses as a tool where we keep building week to week and they get more and more sophisticated. It's also the other thing that people swear a little bit about, like, oh, you're gonna make me do a fucking triangle. And it's also the you know, like, oh, I was in it, I was doing a triangle in my head. How come I'm doing triangles now on my own? I don't like it when you make me do them, and now I'm doing them on my own. Right? There's this sort of like feeling about it that it's like it's invaded my way of thinking. And that second half is just like a ton of like, here's something you might try. Here's something else you might try. Have you thought about things this way? Have you thought about, like, there's just like, and I think that people who become really, where skills works really well is with, as a facilitator, you're like, oh, we plan to do this, but given what we talked about in the triangle today, let's talk about that thing we were planning for 3 weeks from now, because it's perfect for what people talked about today. Let's just do it. So you kind of need to be, as a facilitator, instead of thinking of it as like, I'm going to do public speaking. I remember, you know, when you're in high school, you have, there's public speaking and then there's improv, right? There's one where they gave you a topic, and you got 4 minutes, and then you got to talk for 4 minutes in front of everybody as if you knew anything about this topic. They wrote this little piece of paper. That's kind of what it feels like to do skills for safer living. It's like, and the more things you're familiar with, the easier it is when you get that little slip of paper, you know, from your co-facilitator says like, let's teach this skill. It's like, oh, okay. You know, you want to be able to improv really well. And so I'd say that's both the nerve-wracking and kind of exciting part of the program, because it really is adaptive, and it means whatever needs come up, we're going to figure out a way to make address. And if we're really out of ideas, there's 10 experts in this room that have been struggling with this for many, many years, and they can tell us some things that might have worked for them. So this is not a teacher giving all the time. This is like, well, here's an idea. What do you think about that? How would you do it differently? And anyone else have some ideas here? We're all participants in this learning, as Yvonne said, and that really brings a level of anxiety, I think, down for facilitators. I mean, initially when you learn this is what I'm going to do, you're kind of like, ah, right? Like I think all the new trainees we bring into the program are a little bit wondering, you want me to talk about what completely openly? What? And then when you're in the moment, it actually is a beautiful thing working.
You can really see. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Yanan.
I'd add that, yeah, it took me 3 times of facilitating the group before I really felt comfortable with the material where, you know, we're supposed to be doing something, and, you know, according to the guidebook for this week, and we've planned for this, but the triangle, the subject of the triangle just throws us way back into module 4, but we're pulling that right now because it's so meaningful and it'll have more impact. So you have to be really, really flexible and kind of know what's there, and just pull what you need as it comes up. Oh, you have it, Tim.
You have props. Tim's got props.
It's always right beside me, right? Like, because it's so useful, right? So I know exactly where it is in my shelf, and I can pull it off as soon as I need it. It travels with, I have this version, I have an older Pisa one, because I don't know, maybe someday it'll be faster to find in here. I have the one with, hey, you're doing this in the emergency room, I could look at this one, maybe I'll find it faster there too, right? There's like, it's like a resource. And just, as you say, Elaine, I think it takes a bit of time of doing it over and over until it's like, it's in the Rolodex of your mind. Until it's in your mind, there is a book, and I think Yvonne and I, at some point, it would be wise for us to build that, the thing they put at the back of books sometimes, the index, where you look something up and you can find it, because otherwise we spend a lot of time flipping through looking for that picture that we all have in our minds.
You can tell that you use so many different resources to take the judgment out and to just provide those skills. It's a really good title, Skills for Safer Living, because it sounds like you provide so many different types of skills that people can use. And that I love how it's very much a dialogue between the participants and the facilitators. And that just sounds all such an probably part of the empowerment of the experience.
I think it's an important piece that you go in as a facilitator, you don't necessarily, you have to recognize that you are not all knowing, and that you're not here to deliver a program, you're here to participate in a program. and always remaining very, very curious, right? If I start to lose my curiosity, then I'm getting stuck and I'm probably getting a little rigid. If I get stuck and rigid, then I need to ask myself, what's my fear right now with this person? Or am I afraid I'm losing control in the group and that things are going sideways and I feel helpless, right? So, like when I get really dogmatic, it's generally around safety, you know, and it's like a bottom line of we're either going to the Emerge walking together where I will support you, or do I have to call for help? Please don't have me call for help. Don't make that choice. I'd rather walk with you, you know, kind of thing. So I think that one of my colleagues, a mentor who has been doing group therapy for years and years, said this is clearly a group for which narcissistic facilitators need not apply.
So, you know, this is sort of, you know, whenever you were talking earlier about the responses that people get whenever, you know, they're asked to facilitate, made me wonder. And one of the questions that we have is, what are people's responses to this? Like other organizations, when you're trying to implement it, what are some of the responses and how do you work with those responses of whether it be your psychiatrist colleagues or Yvonne, your psychologist colleagues, like what are people's reactions and how do you work with them to then move forward with the program?
You can go first, Tip.
Okay. I think so we're thinking about this in terms of at HQ where I'm working now, which is, you know, for queer and trans men facility. And we know that death by suicide has exceeded HIV deaths since 2007. So this is clearly something we need to be working on. But that's not knowledge that everybody knows. And so I think part of the mission initially is actually a bit of education about like why this is important to many, many communities, right? And framing things in that way. And then I think it's, you know, finding your allies. Like, you know, you want to know, I have the list of people that if I need to be cheered up with how the system is moving so slowly, that I will call at the end of the day, and they get to hear it, and I return the favor for them when they've been like, I'm trying to get this, you know, substance use kind of treatment available, and I'm just facing all this resistance. So I think those are two things that are just about surviving in this, and then it's like I think we do all need to spend some time thinking about how we reassign resources, right? Like that it's important to think through what's the best use of our time. And I think group interventions that help people early on in their recovery, that get to people sooner, those are really critical. And suicide ought to be a very high priority. And I think it's a hard thing for people to argue when you just bring it up directly. So I think those are my first thoughts on it. And in that, like in HQ, as we've talked about it, like people, you know, that it may just not be something they've been thinking about, right? That they may be in a world where they're thinking about HIV all the time. That's kind of what got us all started in this clinic, is that we're going to do HIV testing, or to bring the rates down because we want fewer and fewer guys. It's like, okay, but then people were saying like, okay, well, the mental health stuff is important, but we don't know anything about mental health. You know, can we bring someone in? And so there's an opening, I think, to educate. And sometimes that's a little bit harder in some situations where people think they already know everything. So my colleagues we're some of the worst with that. So you come to a doctor and we think we know everything, and, you know, encourage them to do skills for safer living. They'll certainly leave and recognize that that's a bunch of bullshit. But, you know, like if you can find a nice, gentle way to point that out to the MDs and the people who hold power in some ways, that's a good task to do.
Yeah, I'll often, when I meet up with a lot of resistance or people, you know, one of the favorite lines that people have offered me, which really drives me over a fine edge, is, you know, I don't know how you can do that work. Right. And it's so much, like when they say that, I have to say, so what is it about the work that you're imagining I do? Because quite frankly, I'm having a good time. I'm kind of enjoying things. I'm never, ever bored. Like 21 years, there was not a single bored day, overwhelmed a few, but never bored. And I also think that there's a personality feature. Like some people are born to work with certain populations and they do really, really well. And it's, you know, is it your strength? Are you a risk taker? Because yeah, you can't be risk averse when we're doing this group, because there are days because you don't know, right? So if you're worried, it can sometimes get a little dicey. I'll often invite people to come and do the groups with me. You know, they'll say, I don't know how you can do this. And I'll say, hey, you want to come facilitate a group with us? Like it's 20 weeks out of your life. It's a learning experience you're never going to have again. And I either get the hell no, and those are the people I'm going to just sort of say, okay, sit back and watch change happen if you see this person again, right? Because I'm not going to get into the fight. It's not about the power struggle. It's going to be the client's voices, right? When they see them next, or they see them at a presentation, or they see that they've co-authored an article, right? I'm not going to waste my time fighting with you. The evidence is there. The people are there. They have voices. They can tell you, because you're clearly not going to listen to me. That's akin to headbanging. Not into headbanging. I need whatever I've got.
So then another question that we have in the chat is around, you know, if people don't attend the group, is there any benefit that they can glean, or is the benefit really only for the folks who are in the group? Or if you're supporting a loved one, perhaps to attend the group. So is it really, it's for people who, do people who don't attend the group, are there any types of other services, I guess, that they can benefit from regarding skills for safer living in this messaging?
Well,
No,
I think
we've right now got some funding out there, or requests for funding for friends and family who support people who live with ideation or attempts, and we're looking at developing a whole program there, because that's a hugely ignored and underserved population. They're struggling as much as our clients in so many ways. So we don't have anything with the youth group, with the 14 to 16-year-olds. It's a parent youth or guardian youth. So there's a concurrent program for the guardian and the youth at the same time.
And what does that look like, that concurrent program?
It's 10 weeks, and we've run it a couple of times. COVID is not making it easy. At this point, we did it with the Children's Mental Health Agency, and right now we're looking at starting it again in February with another agency and workers from the Wellington Waterloo Skills team.
And so, you know, there's also some comments in the chat, and I agree that, you know, we would like to bring this program to Ottawa, if there's any way that we could do that. So what has been the process to start the program in a new organization, in a new city, for example? What would that look like? If, you know, I know that we have already, so that everyone knows, we have some funders that are interested in working with us on this. We have some organizations that have expressed an interest, and we invite all of you, if any of you are interested, to join us in trying to find and work together with these funders, with the organizations that exist, and with me as the coordinator of Suicide Prevention Ottawa, to bring the process along, you know, to see what does it look like? What are the next steps for implementing something like this in Ottawa, Yvonne?
Well, I guess what you would do is figure out who are the people who want to do it. You got to want to do it. Nobody can be made or forced to do it. And you would have Yolande, Tim, and I come and do Skills for Safer Living boot camp. One of the things that I would suggest is Yolande, Tim, and I have all had the experience where we do the groups off the side of our desk. It's sort of on top of our other commitments in our other job roles. I think what's worked so incredibly well with one of our teams is it's a designated team. So those are the folks who are specifically for the SfSL program, whether they work part-time or full-time. So the people who are going to want to be facilitators, their agency or management has to back them up in terms of providing the time for them to do it. And it's not the add-on, it's a part of. And then the three of us would, work your little tail ends off for 5 weeks or 5 sessions. And then we would also figure out the supervision schedule in terms of whether it's myself or Tim or Yolene and I and Tim, or whether there's somebody who's very knowledgeable about groups in your area, like anybody who's belonged to the Canadian Group Psychotherapy Association or the American Group Psychotherapy Association has a lot of experience in groups. And then you start looking for people. Well, you got to decide as well whether you want to do an ideation group or a group for people with ideation only, or a group for people with attempts, or run 2 concurrently, depending on the number of people. Once you've had the 5-day training, you can essentially do the 3-day safety planning group or the 4-week intro group or the 20-week group. It has been pretty consistent, right from the folks who are doing it in Ireland to the Canadian folks, is your 3rd time around is when the penny starts dropping and you go, yeah, okay, now I see the flow. Now I see how it works. Now I see how, this is a module 4 concept, but I have to use parts of 1 and 2 in order to build the foundation to have a more fulsome discussion. Because in 1 and 2, I'm not going to talk about how you communicate with your partner. I'm going to talk about how do you feel, and how do you keep yourself as safe as possible within these kinds of interactions, as opposed to getting into all of the communication strategy type things.
And you already have one live in Ottawa facilitator as of January. So
and she's looking at translating the intervention into French too in her spare time, but she might be doing that on moving boxes.
Yeah, so Yolene works as Psychiatric Survivors of Ottawa and is living in Ottawa. So Yolene is also a peer who's facilitated the session before. So we have a lot of ingredients in place. We have funders that are interested in learning more about how they can support the implementation of this program in Ottawa. We have peers that are asking for this program to come to Ottawa and who are willing to participate in helping to implement it. We also have organizations that are saying, yes, we're interested, but we are putting out a call out to all of you that if you're interested, to get in touch with me so that we can help you join our process. And then we also have very skilled evaluators in Ottawa and researchers that can also help us to evaluate the intervention so that we can make the case for going forward. So, we do have the ingredients to bring this to Ottawa, and now we're looking for some more, worker bees and some people to help us champion this and to bring it through. There was a question in the chat that I wanted to bring forward, Yvonne, about how do you support people who've experienced trauma with the systems, whether it be the medical system or the police system? How do we implement them, or how do we implement the program in a way that's supportive to them? Or even ongoing trauma?
That's something that we hear about a lot. I can get righteously indignant. One of the things that I talk about as one of the strategies is when I'm working with people, because I don't know whether or not they can read emotion in faces, I tend to be very alive when I'm in group, and very expressive. And when people talk about these instances, it's like, that is just so not right, right? And you do have a right to feel safe. And what I also, when they're a little further along already, is how to write a letter to advocate for themselves, whether it be, you know, a bad contact in the hospital, to write a letter to patient affairs or to the manager of the individual. We hear it, like one of the things that I have to tell my psych residents, my medical students, and the psychiatrists who come and do a group with me is stick some Velcro on your backside, because you are going to get lynched about how the medical system mistreats people. And if you get defensive, you're going to miss the point. And so it's about being able to hear it. And I think, Tim, maybe you can talk about it from your experience, because yeah, you got nailed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just part of there are huge problems in our system. And so I think it was just important to just empathize with the experiences people have, and recognize the role I may have played and to be thinking more carefully about what could we be doing differently, right? Whether that's encouraging my colleagues to respond differently at times. You know, it's helpful once you've done something like Skills for Safer Living, there's a way that I end up going down to the Emerge to advocate for people when I know the situations they're in. I go to stick handle things. That's partly, I think it's advantageous if you have a group that also includes a psychiatrist, and maybe there's some back doors that I can kind of walk through and sit down with another psychiatrist and try to shape the way they're going to approach things.
Yeah, we assume right from the get-go that everybody has experienced trauma. We're right now in the middle of writing a paper around a suicide attempt being a traumatic event in and of itself, right? Whether it's you survived and you had intended to end your life, or the response from the people around you, or the fact that you can't believe that things got to this point. Therefore, care for anyone who comes in with thoughts of suicide or a suicide attempt has to begin from a trauma-informed base.
I would add that the other thing that is a little tricky that I've observed in some of the clinical people that I've co-facilitated with is the comfort level of talking about suicide and having it so open, and people around the table saying really, really scary stuff. And they've been trained to respond in a certain way, and to, you know, alarm the red bell right away, call emergency, call the crisis line, call 911. This is, you know, they can't tolerate that level of pain or that level. And so it's coming to terms with, yes, this group is going to talk about really difficult things, and you know, people will get triggered. It's one of my expectations. And the one question I get asked a lot is, how do you sit in a room full of people who've tried to die by suicide, and they keep triggering each other, and how do you deal with all that and have them leave at the end completely safe? And that's the beauty of this group, is that it progresses, and you have that bubble of everyone kind of having all that emotion. And if you need to, you can step out and take care of yourself and come back. But in the end, everyone's come back down. And, you know, the odd time there might be somebody that needs to stay and chat for a bit and get a little bit more support, or plan to stay, how are they going to stay safe after the group because they've been triggered. But most people really, all that emotion comes right back down, and people can leave the room safely and come back the next week. So yeah, but that it's a hard one for clinicians to get used to when they're not used to it. Yeah.
I think that in some ways, there's been some socialization around some professions to become alexithymic and not identify or get in touch with your feelings, right? To remain cold, back, and objective, when in fact, in this group, you are to be a human being with all your warts. It's okay.
This leads well into the next question, which is from someone with lived experiences. And they talk about how, people will often congratulate them for being resilient. And when being resilient wasn't what they chose and it was difficult, I'll actually post the question in the chat so people can read their own words as well, so we can have it at the top. But the question is, how do you take a strength-based approach with people who might feel resentment at having had to be strong or resilient?
Strengths-based is the fact that you can tolerate people calling you resilient is something that not everybody can do, right? The other question is, I would ask if people get really pissed off at being told that they're so resilient. I'll ask about what that is. Is that about you feel like you're being patronized? That it's just a line and that the person doesn't really know how incredibly hard this is, that this isn't necessarily about resilience, it's about existence, because that's all that you're doing at this point in time with one foot in front of the other. So I'd ask a lot of questions. Because yeah, when people say you're so resilient, you got to be careful when you make statements like that, because it could be very, very dystonic with what the person believes and experiences, particularly if they want to be dead. Like that's really, it's just dystonic. Like, I wish I weren't so strong. I wish I weren't so resilient. I wish.
There's another question also about substances, and the question is that about given the taboo and stigma around substance use and suicide, how do you breach the stigma taboo with participants and with funders?
When we bridge the which stigma, substance and mental health and suicide?
Yeah, I think so. Substance and drug use. And, it says, the person says, given the stigma around suicide and drug use to the point where people believe it's almost contagious, how do you breach this stigma taboo in line with participants and funders? So how do you, reassure people perhaps that it's okay to have people come in who have substance use issues to break through that stigma?
I do think it's important that the kind of like, this is not a means and methods group is part of that, right? It's like our discussions are about what people are feeling, what their needs are, what their unwritten rules are. Like the topics are fulsome, and I think that it's very common, like in every group, I think there's a few people that are struggling with substance use as well. And it just sort of feels like it's just kind of part and parcel of, at some point, someone's going to mention that that's how they cope with times. And that's just something we put up there. Okay, so that's the choice you've got. And we add it to the list and people acknowledge it. And we're on a mission to find things that are safer. And so we kept come back to the and that's a helpful kind of frame. It's like, this is the reality of people's lives, but it would make no sense to ignore it, pretend it's not there. And the contagion idea, I think, is only important insofar as to hear the detail of means and methods can be kind of unhelpful in a certain way. And yet discussing openly the degree of the intensity and the and my choices is a useful part of the discussion. So it kind of feels to me like it's walking a balanced edge here that works. I'm curious, Elena, what your thoughts are on this, because seeing you and thinking your reaction, thinking about it, I could imagine you would also kind of have a sense of like, how do we navigate around this?
In terms of, well, I think Yolene spoke of the whole piece about, you know, you think there's an assumption about the contagion piece. And yeah, sometimes some groups are really active and activated, and it's not an everyday occurrence. When you have mental illness, you have substance use, it's part of people's reality. And I have to be like, I mean, full disclosure, I'm a clinician. I'm not a fundraiser. And so where those issues have come up, it's with people who have been doing the talking with the fundraisers, right? So whether it be, you know, the agency that is supporting it, either the research or the intervention. I tease people who got funded rather well, you know, that they definitely play golf well, and that they're able to go to high-end lunches well. I'm in the Emerge, or I'm doing a group at lunchtime, thanks very much, so I won't be there. And I can't hit a ball with a golf club for love or money, you know. So it's about, it's not my strength, and therefore I rely on people for whom it is their strength. I can talk about the clinical piece, but when it comes to that stuff, that's so not within my strength. And, you know, as I said, you know, in terms of the contagion, I'll just sort of, it's like, I haven't had that experience, and people are people.
Yolene, did you want to add in anything about the contagion and the substance use? And
Yeah, it's not been an issue in the groups that, you know people cope in different ways, and it is what it is. And it's all about, trying to stay as safe as possible. So it's brainstorming, and you don't know, somebody around the table might not have disclosed that they use a certain coping mechanism, and somebody else will mention that they've, that's how they coped. And without them disclosing anything, all of a sudden they get a group of people around the table saying, well, how can you do this safer? What can make this safer for you in the future? What else can you do? And that's, that can help the other person. Like I said, this group essentially has changed the way I wouldn't be here still if it hadn't been for this group. I feel that strongly about it, because I've attempted several times, and I can't promise that I won't attempt again, but I'm doing my darnness to live as safely as I can in each and every moment. And, moving from Hamilton to here and not having any supports here, it's starting a new job all at the same time. My anxiety's just been through the roof, and I don't know that I would have survived for a week of it. I had to sell in one place, buy in another, in this crazy market, and plan everything. And, it's just overwhelming. And I'm still dealing with it one day at a time. Sometimes it's 1 minute at a time, one task at a time. And it's, and having someone I can call, and if I'm in trouble, and that I can trust, and that won't overreact. But yeah, my psychiatrist is now she's referring people to this group, because she's seen the difference in me. And knowing that I might not always make the best choice. I made the choice that seemed the best for me at the moment. And, you know, I can learn from it. And I'm dealing with things one thing at a time.
And I also have to point out that Yolene got in touch with me a number of years ago and said, hi, my name's Yolene. I've heard about your program. Can you come to Hamilton? And it was her persistence with her management that got us there to do the training, got us there to do the first group that she was part of. And you know, it's who's your champion, and is persistent.
Well, we're so glad that you're here, Yolande, and we're so glad to have you here. And
Ottawa's lucky. Ottawa's very lucky.
We're bringing it to Ottawa next. That's our next step. Yes, there's Sonia Cronkite, who's the ED at Psychiatric Survivors of Ottawa, who's played a really key role also in facilitating having Yolande come here. So we're all very glad that you're here. So thank you for coming to Ottawa. There was one other question in the chat around, we were running out of time, but there was a question about how do you identify people to join, both be participants in the group, but also to become peer facilitators?
That's sort of an iterative process of people will, like, I mean, once people know who to contact to participate in the group, then they do the group. The people in Toronto is they did 2 groups, and it's the facilitators of the group who were noticing things like the person is integrating the material, the person is able to articulate the challenges they're having with various concepts, and they're able to explain it to the new folk who are doing it for the first time. You know, this is the struggle that I had. They're very transparent. They're very upfront. Like, you know, when Yvonne first talked about this, I thought she was just full of shit. And you know what? Maybe she's not as full as I thought she was. I still think she's got shit. You know, like, I mean, they'll play around like that. And they'll say, you know, it didn't work for me in this particular way. So what I did was I turned it around and I looked at it from this perspective. Those are the folks that when you see them starting to integrate, it doesn't mean that they're not still experiencing crises. And like, I mean, that is one of the things that we've had where peers have ended up in the emerge, and it's the resident who's on overnight, who's also the co-resident in the group. And they both kind of get over that awkwardness of like, oh, how do we navigate this, right? And it's about having a conversation, which they're able to do. So it's you know, definitely lots and lots of ins and outs and valleys, and it's, are you ready to fasten your seatbelt, because it's quite the adventure. Tim, you had a response on your face. All I saw was your teeth.
Well, I was looking at one of the other comments or questions that was in there that was related, which is about, you know, does this need to be affiliated with a hospital? Does it need to? And like, I found this very fascinating because I've managed to go with Yvonne to a number of different places. Some places it's affiliated with hospitals, and some places completely in the community. And it seems to work well in both. Some places it's like at a university or a community college that's doing it, that has, you know, maybe there's a mental health service that they could. I think it's useful if you have some sort of relationship with other services you can draw on if you need. But it just made me think, like, some of those, you know, being the psychiatrist that's on the staff who gets to get the phone call overnight. Like, I've also had the, oh, so-and-so is here. But it also means that there are times where Yvonne and I have, in the middle of the evening, middle of the night, you know, gone to stand at a corner to make sure a group member is safe. You know, it's like, you know, like, and so there is a bit of I'm not saying that this is part of skills for safer living, but this is just, there's an attitudinal piece, I would say, that comes with people, which is that you you do what you can, you pitch in where you can, and that's very helpful to have in the facilitators, which I think is more important than what your backup is. Hey, is having a hospital behind me helpful as a backup? Absolutely. Like if I can go talk to a person in Merge because I work there, I can often facilitate things in a way that I couldn't do in. Do I think that that's a barrier to actually doing skills for safe living? No, I'm planning to do this in a community setting at HQ where we don't really have a hospital backup, but it's needed, so we're gonna do it. So I would just say like that part also strikes me. It's like you look around in your community, see what you got, work with it, get started. You know, I once went to this hypnosis training and said it's not ready, aim, fire. It's ready, fire, aim. So get the thing started and then kind of get it closer to where you want to be, which is a lot of, I think, how the skills works in week to week. You do something, you're like, that ain't working. Let's change it right midstream today because that's clearly falling flat. So let's try something new. And just being that flexible, I think, has been super helpful.
Great. Well, that's a really good way to end, I think, because it's the inspiration for where we're heading in Ottawa and how we're going to, just go ahead and implement it and continue to adjust it to our context as we go and to the context of the participants as we go. So I'll pass it over to Lisa to take us out.
Thank you so much for facilitating those questions, Andrea. And thank you everyone for participating and for asking such incredibly thoughtful questions. And Yvonne and Tim, you'd be a hoot to watch. And Yolene, Ottawa is so lucky to have you. I moved here from Burlington, and if you have any questions, we're connected now. You can reach out to me anytime, but just so this city is blessed to have you. Just want to say, webinars like this are just so great, such great participation. And Tim, the spicy vocabulary, it gives me an opportunity to have teaching opportunities with my 2 teenage boys, because when they hear spicy vocab, they're like, Mom, what you talking about today? Gives me learning opportunities. So I thank you for that. But really, Andrea, thanks for pulling us together. Thanks for the planning committee, all the work that you've pulled together. Ottawa is going to move forward in great strides. And so, as Andrea mentioned a number of times, anyone that's interested in the program, please reach out directly to Andrea. And I just wish you all a safe and healthy day. And thank you so much for participating.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.